Welcome to the Museum Roadshow. Today we're visiting with Charles Gunderson, who was Wally Schultz's son-in-law, as he shares with us some of his memories of working with Wally in Schultz Garage and Record Service. Wally Schultz built his own records back in the 30s and early 40s. And pretty crude things, but they did the job. They were well known in the Becker County and Detroit Lakes area to getting vehicles out of the predicaments they were in. And Wally's records helped get Tom Rogs's house across the ice on Detroit Lake in February 1958 and get it pulled back up on the road by Nason Bay. The Occupational Safety and Health Act came into effect in 1971. And of course, Wally's records weren't in any codes by that time to meet OSHA specs. I do remember a sign in a welding shop that read, "If you think OSHA is a small town in Wisconsin, you're in big trouble."
Okay, Wally and his twin brother started, we think, back in about 1936. They were in high school together, of course, in town here. And they started out as garbage men, I believe. And they also had a two-wing Jenny that they would fly around and do some barnstorming with. Like I said, they did a lot of wild things, I guess, back for then. And then I guess when World War II came about in Pearl Harbor, they went down to join the service. And his brother made it, and Wally, with a bum knee, did not pass a physical. So he stayed on and ran the family business, where his brother went on to be a pilot in World War II, the Korean War, and later for NORAD out of Colorado, I believe it's out of. So he went from the props to the jets. So that made it kind of interesting. And as far as back in the 40s and 50s, there's one picture I brought there that shows them putting up banners for like July 4th or maybe possibly the water carnival, I'm not sure. And now, of course, every truck in town's got a bucket on it, seems like, or every company has access to it. But back then, you know, he would use these to put those banners up. I can remember one time before I came back to Detroit Lakes, there was a storm, and there was a tree probably 50, 60 feet tall down by the beach that was broke off. Well, no problem, come along and see how this works out. So I got to get in on this one. And he had a 40-foot boom on the trucker, and he backed up to the tree, tied it on top, chained it to the bottom of the record, cut it off, and the tree swang a little bit, pulled out and laid it down. And meanwhile, all the crowd was watching. You know, it was quite a feat. So I got in on a few tree removals like that were pretty precarious. And the booms, I'm sure he made them himself. You know, like I say, he had a 40-foot boom, a 20-foot boom, and like about a 10-foot boom also. And I remember using probably the 20-footer to unload propane tanks, for example. But now when a truck comes in, they have their own boom right on the truck, so that's kind of a thing of the past there, too. But both of them were made at the garage, I believe. Talking to one of the fellows that made the Orange Wrecker, it's called, said they used a GM 6-cylinder clutch and transmission to run that winch. Like I said, both trucks had winches on the front, and they were run by off the power takeoff for the truck itself. But that winch would be used to run the boom, and you had the other room to act as a crane. The booms he made would fit both wreckers, and you'd pull a big pin to set them down. And like I said, they were pretty heavy, but there again, they would fit each wrecker. They both had their use. And these things, I remember on one wrecker call I got to go in on was a bus that was from Ogama that was up in the ditch. And we went up there, and when we got there, put it in 6-wheel drive and drive right out in the field, and the snow was deep, but the trucks seemed to go through anything. And pulled the bus out, no problem. Well, there's always danger in the record business. Sometimes the cables would snap, so you want to make sure you're hiding when you didn't want a cable to come snap back at you. That's probably the worst thing you worried about was the cable breaking, because you didn't have much warning when it was over. It was too late. So that was the biggest thing, is doing stuff like that. Okay. And of course, a lot of these, over the years, the trucks we pull out are on glare ice, and that's where the 6x6 really had the traction, of course, but nothing does it like the winch, so the winch does the pulling.
When the wreckers were called out, of course, the road conditions would be at their worst. They'd be icy. Sometimes it was snowing, and often it was dark. And, of course, it would be cold. Wally's trucks didn't have any heaters in them. It took 2 men to drive the truck in the wintertime, one guy to drive, and one guy to keep the ice and frost scraped off the windshield so they could see where they were going. Upon arriving at the scene, Gundy often thought about Wally. He'd look at the predicament the vehicle was in and think to himself, now what would Wally do? And on one of the first record calls that Gundy went out on with Wally was up by the Bad Medicine Lake area, where a motorhome had gone off the road and ended up out in a kind of a lake or a swamp. Well, when they got there, they noticed this motorhome was just kind of teetering. It was very close to tipping over. And the first thing they did was get a boat. They put a block and tackle in the boat and a long cable, and they went out and they fastened this block and tackle to the motorhome. And then they took the long cable and they fastened one end to the block and tackle. And they noticed a tree off in the distance that they thought would anchor this cable, so they hooked the cable onto that. Then they positioned the wrecker in such a way that they could winch on the block and tackle with the wrecker. And by using that method, they managed to pull the motorhome further out into the lake and get it straight with the world. With that accomplished, they unhooked their apparatus from the front of the motorhome and proceeded to pull the motorhome back onto the road. Wally and Margaret had 5 girls, Kay and Ruth, Ginny, Carol, and Mary. Gundy joined the business in 1977, and his son Mike now has joined the business in the fall of 2010, and he took over the operation of the business in January of 2013. Mike was inducted into the Detroit Lakes Athletic Hall of Fame in 2012. Keep listening for more episodes about Wally Schultz and his brother barnstorming days up in the Ada area, and also about Wally's days on the fire department.